So if you're joining us for the first time today, or maybe the first time in a long time, welcome and welcome back. To orient you a little bit, we're talking about the Noble Eightfold Path. And right now we're on the part called right action. And right action is made up of three different parts. Refraining from killing, refraining from taking what is not freely given, and refraining from using sex in harmful ways. And so I'll talk about refraining from killing today, but I'm going to talk about it also in a sort of broader framework of non-harming, which is a principle that all of these kind of fall under. There's a way that I think that non-harming gets confused with passivity. And so Buddhism gets this reputation too, and meditation can get this reputation that it is a passive practice, or a practice that is sort of about a passive way of living, right? A passive way of being in the world. And that's always sort of confused me because the Buddha talked extensively about how we live, how we act, how we speak, right? How we use our bodies. And it's also like right there in the Noble Eightfold Path, like right there in the middle, right action. And the Buddha himself was not a passive person. He did not live his life without care or interest for the people that he was sharing the world with. The Buddha in his lifetime intervened in wars, stood in front of armies. He spoke directly to the ruling class and said that they have a responsibility to make sure that people aren't living in poverty in their realm. He debated people who were spreading harmful ideas. He challenged the caste system. He was active, right? He was doing stuff. And so this principle of non-harming is an active practice. And it's based in a couple of observations about reality, about the way that the world works. And one of those observations about reality is the reality that we are connected to one another. We are interconnected. And maybe you've noticed that during our practice today, that we are in contact with one another, right? We react to each other. We feel each other. And it makes sense then that when we start to see that reality, we also start to get thoughtful about the way that we talk to one another, the ways that we act, the way that we live in the world. We start to see that separateness is a delusion, right? It's an illusion. Non-harming is also based in the principle of karma. And karma is just cause and effect. Right? It is just actions and their consequences, not in a moral sense, but in like a natural law of the universe sense. This is just the way that the world works. Right? There's a flow of cause and effect. And karma, when it has to do with our actions, is just that, right? Actions have consequences. There's a flow of cause and effect. One of the Buddha's closest people was called Ananda. And Ananda asked the Buddha once, "What is the purpose of ethics?" And the Buddha said the purpose of ethics is freedom from harm, or freedom from remorse. The purpose of ethics is freedom from remorse. And Ananda said, and what is the purpose of freedom from remorse? And the Buddha said, the purpose of freedom from remorse is joy, right? A lightness in the heart. The Buddha was saying that when we are not thoughtful about how we're impacting other people, we live with remorse, right? We suffer the pain of remorse and guilt and shame. It makes our minds restless, right? Our hearts are not at ease. And that is karma. And so when we're talking about something like abstaining from killing, what the Buddha was basically showing us was like, hey, if you kill other living beings, if you intentionally harm other living beings, you will live with the pain of remorse and shame. You will live with it in your heart and your mind. And for many Buddhists, the karmic consequences of that kind of harm doesn't end in this life. Right? It carries on into the next life. And I can't really wrap my mind around reincarnation, but to me this is an idea that points to the lasting impact. Right? That killing doesn't end with death, but carries on. Right? It echoes out. It leaves a mark. And you might be able to see this in sort of less extreme circumstances in your own life. That when we speak cruelly to other people, it leaves a mark. Right? You feel it in your heart. It stays in your memory. It stays in the relationship. Lying leaves a mark. Physical and emotional and sexual abuse leaves a mark. It carries on. I've been trying to sort of reflect on this idea this week, and I'm finding myself thinking about it when I'm using water or throwing something away. I'm thinking about the impact. Oh yeah, this leaves a mark. And so non-harming just recognizes these realities and aligns our actions with these realities. Right? Not because if I turn the water off when I'm brushing my teeth, I'm going to solve the water crisis, but because when I turn the water off, I'm in alignment, right, with actions and their consequences, with the reality of things. Right? These ethical principles in Buddhism are phrased as abstaining from, refraining from, practicing restraint around. And those words can have quite negative connotations, right? Especially if you grew up in a culture or a religion where there was a moral law laid down that maybe did restrict your freedom, right? Restricted the way that you live your life, right? The choices that you make about your own life. Maybe restricted your ability to live in your body in the way that was authentic to you. But there is a kind of refraining from that is wholesome and wise. And I think what makes it wholesome and wise is when it comes from seeing with our own eyes, seeing from our own experience, what is wise to refrain from. And so we learn about what's wise to refrain from by watching consequences play out, right? Watching the marks left behind by some things, watching the lightness of heart that's left behind by others. There are two terms in the Pali language, the language that the Buddha taught and spoke in, called hiri and ottappa. And hiri is translated as moral shame. It is an aversion to doing things that are harmful because they injure our own sense of integrity and self-respect. So there's a 5th century Buddhist philosopher and scholar named Buddhaghosa who said that hiri is like reaching out to grab an iron rod and seeing that it's covered in shit and recoiling from it in disgust. That recoiling away from something harmful in disgust, cringing away from it, that is protective, right? That's wise. It is a recoiling away from that which might harm myself by filling my own heart and mind with guilt, right, and regret. It's protecting me from harming someone else, right? It helps us protect each other. And so that internal recoiling is a signal, right? It's an intuition that our words or actions don't feel right? They don't make us feel good about ourselves. So we might refrain from them. Ottappa is translated as moral dread or moral fear, which I think is an interesting one. What might we fear when it comes to our own harmful actions? We might fear those marks left on our relationships. We might fear that people will turn away from us. We might fear that disconnection, that separation. We might fear losing the respect of someone that we love and admire. And again, this is said to be a wholesome quality, a healthy fear. It has to do with that desire and that motivation to refrain from harming someone else because we see the consequences. The metaphor that Buddhaghosa used here was that ottappa is like reaching out to grab an iron rod and seeing that it's glowing red from heat. And so we refrain from grabbing it to avoid painful consequences. And the intuition that we're developing there is a recognition that it is possible to harm others with our speech and our actions. And a recognition that it is wise and healthy and protective to have some wise discernment, right, around what is driving our actions and our words, and might that be harmful, and to refrain from that. Hiri and ottappa are considered guardians of the world because they protect us from the karmic consequences of our actions and the guilt and the shame that follow. And they help us protect each other from harm. And they are based in restraint, in recoiling from those things that are right to be recoiled from. But this teaching is not all about restraint. It's also about cultivating a wholesome counterpart to that, which is compassion. If harm comes from the delusion that we are separate from one another, then compassion is the insight that we are not, that we are connected. It is seeing someone else's suffering and seeing something familiar in it. Not that we suffer in exactly the same ways, to the same degrees, in the same circumstances, but we know what fear is. We know what pain is. We know what guilt and shame and regret are. We know what anger is. We know what jealousy is. We know pain. There is a passage in the Dhammapada that says, "Everyone fears violence. Everyone fears death just as you do. Therefore, do not kill or cause to kill. Everyone fears violence. Life is dear to all, just as yours is. Therefore, do not kill or cause to kill." When we understand that we are connected to one another, we start to see that this recoiling, this cringing away, this disgust we feel at the violence in the world, right, is that same kind of cringing and recoiling from the unwholesome stuff we see arising in our own hearts and minds. This is the heart's compass. Okay? This is Hiri and Otapa, the guardians of the world, telling us that there is something there that is unwholesome, right, unskillful, not in harmony with life, not aligned with the reality of things. This takes insight, right? It takes discernment, it takes wisdom to develop the heart's compass and to read it. Because there are all sorts of ideas out there about what harm is and what isn't, and what we should be ashamed of and what we shouldn't be. Right, again, maybe we learned that the body is something to be ashamed of. Maybe we learned that saying no is harmful. And so there are things that confuse the compass. And so we have to see for ourselves. These ideas are not commandments. Right? It's not so much saying, do not kill. The heart, I think, of this, is saying, when we truly understand what it means to kill, when we are fully understanding the reality of things, the reality of actions and their consequences, the reality of our interconnectedness, fully understanding the grave and lasting impacts of taking a life, we will recoil from that. So what we practice in here is the development of wisdom and insight and discernment. We practice that. We look inside and we ask, what is guiding me? What is in the heart right now? Where are my actions coming from? Is there greed? Is there hatred? Is there delusion in the heart right now? What do I observe in my own life and in the world around me about where that leads? What the consequences of actions born out of greed and hatred and delusion are. And when we fully understand those consequences, the heart's compass turns itself toward compassion. Again, not out of a moral sense of obedience, but because it fully understands this reality of things. I will stop there today. Let's take a couple of minutes to sit. You can take what is useful to you and abandon what isn't. And then we will move into our heart practice.